Well, let's get another perspective on the market meltdown and what role the federal government can play when the economy suffers these setbacks. And exactly where are we heading with all of this? Ian Lee is a professor in the Sprott School of Business at Carleton University in Ottawa. He is with me now. Ian Lee, good to see you again.
My pleasure.
Thanks for being with us. Let's start right there. Are we heading for a recession? Are you convinced of that?
I believe we are, and I don't just mean Canada. I mean I think we're going into a global synchronized recession because of the impact of the coronavirus on the supply side, but meaning shutting down supply because factories are closed and people are being quarantined. But it's feeding over onto the demand side because people are terrified. So what are they doing? Staying home, not going to shopping centers, not getting on airplanes, not going to restaurants. In other words, they're not doing all the things that we normally do, which involves spending money.
Right.
And so all that money is being sucked out of the economy, and that's surely going to hit an awful lot of businesses.
That may be where we're headed, and let's look at the path of how we get there, given what we've seen certainly today with a meltdown in the stock markets, plunging oil prices. Connect those dots for us.
Sure.
What's the connection between coronavirus and plunging oil prices, and why we're seeing what we're seeing?
Right. You're right. It does start with the coronavirus, and it started in China. And why that's important is China is the second largest economy in the world, 14 trillion GDP in US dollars. They're the largest importer of oil in the entire world. And because of the coronavirus, shutting down Wuhan and many, many factories, and then people self-isolating on their own, what happened was the demand for oil in China dropped over 20%, or over 3 million barrels a day. And that came straight out of the world economy, the world oil economy, because they imported it. That drove down prices for oil. Saudi Arabia called an emergency meeting of OPEC last week in Vienna. Of course, Russia was there because Russia and China are two of the three largest oil producers in the world, along with US. They negotiated for 3 days for production cuts to try and keep the price of oil up. And at the end of 3 days, the Russians said, nope, we're out of here. And Saudi Arabia is so determined to maintain their market share. They said, okay, we're going to get you, but we're going to fight for our share, and you're going to pay a price. So what they did is they immediately cut the price by $6 a barrel to China, one of their biggest customers, and they announced they're going to pump 1 million barrels more a day of oil into a market where there's a huge surplus of oil right now because of the demand being down, because the factories being closed, people not flying airplanes and so forth.
Right.
So that in turn, what we're witnessing now is a global game of chicken, if you will, between Saudi Arabia and Russia, Mr. Putin, to see who will blink first. And that's where we are right now.
So what effect does that have on governments in this country? And particularly, we're talking about Alberta. I mean, what's the effect of all this in Alberta?
Devastating, in one simple word, devastating. Just very quickly to sort of connect some more dots. Every oil company and oil well and oil producing country has a different cost of production, which is critical because that tells you what your break-even point tells you what kind of a price of oil you can bear. Saudi has the lowest oil price extraction cost in the world.
Right, they
pump
it out of the ground.
It's 200 feet down on the ground. It's all sand. You just stick your well in, and there somewhere it's been widely reported by reputable sources between 15 and 17 US a barrel to pull it out of the ground. Russia is in the mid-40s to 50s. Canadian oil sands producers are in the 60s per barrel. U.S. shale producers are in the 45. The Fed Reserve Dallas did a study last year, and they calculated around $45, $48 a barrel for the shale producers. So you can see if oil's down to $30 a barrel, most countries, save and except Saudi Arabia, are losing their shirt.
So if you're the federal government, you're the finance minister, we've got a budget coming up, what can this federal government do to mitigate? You can't stop what's happening.
That's right.
It's happening outside our borders, and we don't control it. Is the best you can do is to try and support people and mitigate against the damage from it?
I think that's why I was critical of the interest rate cut, because I don't believe that monetary policy will work in this instance. Partly it's at a very, very low level to start with, and more importantly, I'm not going to go back to work if I'm staying home because I'm terrified of getting the coronavirus. I'm sitting in China or South Korea or Italy. I'm not going to go to work just because the central bank cut interest rates half a point. I'm going to say, I'm not going there. I'm not going shopping. That won't work. It's on the fiscal side, and Morneau is going to have to, I think, stand up and say that they're going to, I don't want to use the word bailout, but provide liquidity and support to those industries to stop mass bankruptcy. I mean, hotels, airlines, you know, and the travel and entertainment sector.
Convention centers all
are just getting whacked. They're getting hammered. And so I think he's going to have to stand up. How you disperse the money, how you allocate it is details to be determined by the bureaucrats, but he's going to have to announce liquidity support, especially for SMEs, because they're the most vulnerable. They're going to be going down like 10 pins in a bowling alley.
Small and medium enterprises.
Small and medium enterprises.
So you're well aware of the government's fiscal framework here and its approach to spending and deficits. It's all about maintaining or lowering the debt to GDP ratio. That's the measure of their fiscal approach. I mean, is that whole given what we're seeing now and what the way the government might have to respond? Is that approach in peril? I mean, that standard of being able to say, look at the debt to GDP ratio, is that in peril if this lasts a fair bit of time?
I think it is. The PBO warned, they didn't predict it was going to be blown through, that debt to GDP ratio, but they certainly highlighted it, that it's at risk. I think given the gravity and the enormity of this crisis, that understandably and properly so, any Minister of Finance, including Mr. Morneau, is going to have to say, number one is saving the economy. Number one is saving those thousands upon thousands of businesses that are being gutted and destroyed by the complete collapse of revenues in certain sectors. Mm-hmm. So he's going to have to say, we'll come back and talk about that after, with getting a plan back into, if not balance, into bringing GDP, debt to GDP into line. But I think in the short run, he's going to suspend it or say setting it aside, because that's not the priority. The priority, of course, is all of these businesses that have been whacked. And of course, the reason that's important to everybody is because they employ millions of people. Mm. And these people, if these businesses do fail, then you're going to see an enormous increase in unemployment. So the government pays either in the short run or in the longer run, because the EI is run by the government of Canada. So if you don't save these businesses from failing right now, well, it shows up in a different category called unemployment insurance.
All right, Ian Lee, always good to get your perspective. Thanks.
My pleasure. Thank you.